Hello, this is Kelly Hammond, and welcome to the Resiliency Coach podcast. This podcast showcases people who have faced difficult times and how they got through it. These experiences are real and sometimes raw. The people who share their stories are here to tell you you're not alone in your struggle. They share the tools and resources they use in healing. If you're looking for solutions for getting through tough times, contact us at www.resiliency.coach. So today I'm interviewing my friend, Christa Theg. Christa comes from Massachusetts, where she started her career as a mental health professional. After about 7 years, she realized that she could be more of an impact in the world as a coach. She hired a coach who became her mentor and business partner. She now helps people in the areas of confidence and building a second stream of income so they can have a life free of stress and worry. Thank you so much, Christa, for being my guest on my podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me, Kelly. I appreciate it. I love your intro, I have to say, and it really got me thinking. Usually coming on podcasts, it's I think about talking in one direction, but just this concept blows my mind. So I guess I kind of want to start, at the beginning.
Please do. Please share your story.
Yeah. So I guess something unique about me is I was born with a weakened immune system, and I coughed the moment I entered the world, and people are like, "Oh, that's not normal." I was always sick growing up, and that for me that meant like spending a lot of time alone, because anytime I was around people, I would get sick. So that really made me a person who paid attention and listened to the people around me. So that created this kind of, I guess I would call myself a people watcher, because it was hard for me to get close to people, because interacting with too many people meant I would wind up physically ill, and like a cold would wipe me out for 2 weeks, like literally in bed. So the average person would get a cold, be fine. Me, 2 weeks out flat. So I was able to really, I don't know if I would call it honing my skills. I mean, maybe I would, but I really learned how to pay attention to people around me, how people interacted with each other, and kind of really learn to listen and understand from a deeper level where people were coming from, which, ultimately aided in my career choice to become a mental health professional. Along with that, I think many families, I come from a divorced family background, which meant I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. So I kind of joke that while I grew up in the 90s, like mid to late 90s, I really grew up in the 50s because of the values of my grandparents that I grew up around. So I went to school, and, as much as I could being sick, I actually wound up being put on a IV medication. And so every few weeks I would have to take some time. I would actually wind up at a hospital up in Boston, and I would get my treatments that would wipe me out. And that's something I think I actually didn't share a lot. I mean, I knew my classmates and the people around me knew I would kind of disappear for a period of time, and I would come back and be okay. But ultimately, getting through school, building relationships with my peers and superiors in life was, good overall. My family really was into education. So it wasn't like, are you going to college or not? It's which college are you going to? And after college, what's are you going to go right into your career path, or are you going to grad school? So I picked mental health because, like I said, it felt like a good fit for me. And being from a background with like divorced parents, and I didn't grow up with a good relationship with my father. And somebody actually asked me not that long ago, Christa, do you think you went into therapy, because you wanted to work out your stuff? And I was like, no. And I've known therapists who've done that. they were like, I want to figure out my family dynamics through my career. And I'm like, I do not recommend that. I do not recommend using other people to kind of gain insight about your own situation. Not recommended. But for me, I was like, no, I really just want to help people. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that on a subconscious level, there were questions I had that I wanted to kind of see if I could figure out, while not projecting on other people, of course. But being in the field, I think you go into anything kind of rosy or green, some people call it, and you see only the good things. But then you can get into it. And for me, it felt like there were so many restrictions. Like, I'm working with a person and they have this need. And I would constantly get that reminder of, Christa, you're not a caseworker. You work with the mental health piece of it. If you wanted to work with those other systems, you should have been a social worker. And I was like, well, no, I don't want to work with those other systems. I want to work with the person. I want to help the person get their needs met. And sometimes you need to get physical needs met before you can deal with the mental. Because how can you try to work with a person's mental state if the basics aren't being met? And that was just something that drove me up the wall for a good chunk of my career. I wanted to end up in medical, like in a hospital. That's really where I wanted to end up. But for different reasons with my own health, I wound up, working what I hoped would be towards a medical type atmosphere. But my first career was actually in a methadone clinic. And I think that was the beginning of the end for me, so to speak, because it was so intense. And on my first day, I literally was screamed at by a client. But when it came down to it, I left the room shaking like a leaf, like you would when a 6 foot, rather large man is yelling at you about not allowing him to get his needs met about things. And I'm like, I'm just here for the mental piece. I will do what I can for you. Well, it wasn't good enough. It was kind of a baptism by fire. But I didn't realize at that point how mentally draining for me that atmosphere was. And it kind of wore on, and I got to know my colleagues better. And, they're like, oh, you'll get used to it. It'll be fine. And it's like, how can you get used to a state of constant, like, on your toes, like that fight or flight? Like, is the client I'm going to have in my room within the next few minutes, are they going to be personable? Or, are they in a situation where maybe, they haven't gotten their methadone yet? They feel like crap. And, because they're known to skip the counseling portion of their appointment, they have to see me before they're allowed to get their methadone, which wasn't always a pleasant situation, because you're trying to work with a person who isn't fully present to receive or really to give in a situation that's conducive to healing. But I think one of the things that struck me most, you start to get to know people in an office setting. And, I can kind of remember the day I was sitting with one of my colleagues, and she asked me, okay, so what are you on? And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, we're all on mental health medications. And I'm like, what? Like, this isn't making sense to me. Aren't we here to be healing? Like, I find it interesting that if you're telling me all of my colleagues have their anti-anxiety, antidepressive medications stored in their desk, like that was a thinker for me, and really got me going on, is this the type of environment that I can really thrive and help people in? Granted, everyone has their calling, and the people who were there were very good at their jobs. They were. I give them so much credit for working with that population of people. But what it drove me to realize was I don't want to put myself in a position where I have to be relying on a medication to live and have some semblance of a life. And I didn't realize how much I had never been diagnosed with anxiety. And within a year and a half of working in this place, I started having these physical symptoms that I actually thought were connected to the IV medication I was having, because there's known to be symptoms that, like, you can have reactions. And it happened around the time I had one of my infusions that I was really starting to get this tight chest pain, and I just couldn't catch my breath. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to reject this medication, and I need to see a doctor, because, like, if this medication is keeping me healthy. So I went to the doctor, did all the tests and all the things, and they're like, you're fine. Maybe you should go see your PCP. So I saw my primary doctor, and he was like, what you're describing really sounds like anxiety. And I was like, no, it's physical. Like, it has to be a physical thing. Like, I don't feel anxious. Thinking back, yes, I actually felt very anxious, but it wasn't a prolonged anxiety, which I felt. And actually the diagnostic manuals was like, it's typically a prolonged thing or something in bursts that lasts a long period of time. And in my mind, I was like, no, I don't fit that. So I was living in this constant state of fight or flight, but it wasn't registering that I was having this anxiety. So at that point, I wound up seeing a therapist who showed me some, really cool insights about different ways to look at life, as well as helping me to realize that maybe I wasn't in a career that was right for me. Just possibly. So I went from there, and I wound up in a community mental health setting. But at that point, I think this seed had been planted, and maybe even prior to that burnout's a thing, we'll put it that way. And I was like, I'm only in my mid-20s. I'm 29, as of now. But I was like, if this is how I'm feeling this early in my career, I'm not going to make it. I'm not making it out of it, like, alive here. So I really had some personal rethinking to do on that. And this seed had been planted of, there has to be more. There has to be a way that I can help people on a level that makes sense, that doesn't feel so restrictive. And from there, let's see, I wound up working in homes with people, still doing my thing, still needing the IV. So whenever a client had a health concern, I would have to say, well, okay, I'm not going to be able to see you today. Let's reschedule. That was a little bit better, seeing people in their homes. But moving from a methadone clinic to in-home community mental health, it was a jump. And seeing people in their homes, it's very sobering, because when you see a person in a clinic, you see the person in front of you, but you don't know their environment. You don't know the people who surround them. When you're in the home, you see it all, and then some things you wish you didn't see. And I would say on some level, it was much less stressful from being in the methadone clinic, but more stressful because there was, I think, more, how do I want to say this? Like, when you're in a situation that you're by yourself, you kind of have to have your wits about you. And, I got into a few situations where I would come home and, tell my mom in a city not too far, I'd gotten in a few situations where I had been followed by a car with a group of men in it. And, they did this, hey, are you Sharon? Nope, not Sharon, kept walking. And of course, I was at least half a block from my car. And, I was driving to my next destination and they drove down that road too. So that was scary. Granted, the next client wasn't thrilled and they were like, "You brought them here." I'm like, "No, I didn't bring these people with me." Oh, and I mean, that was one of many situations. And something I learned is, even if you have a skill for working with people, um, always be smart about how you approach a person, and make sure if it's a person who maybe has challenges and struggles with dissociation specifically, don't put them between you and the door. I made that mistake once in a person's home. And I think I definitely turned my mom's hair a couple shades of gray after that story. But from there, I actually wound up shifting into doing more group work. So it's a spectrum of experience in the mental health field. And like the methadone clinic, there are definitely people called to that environment of work, but for me, that wasn't for me. And of course, there was still that little bug of, there's a better way. You want to be more entrepreneurial in how you're approaching.
So one of the questions I have is, when you said the therapist gave you insights, what does that mean? What kind of insights do you mean?
Right. So starting in that area, I had never realized that it wasn't so much that things happened to me, if that makes sense. Because I was living from a place that, the world is this big bad thing who just keeps throwing things at me, and I'm trying to deal with it, and have my shield and trying to cover myself. But she taught me that really it's my perception of the world, and shifting from the idea that everything is coming at me to everything is coming through the lens of my perception. That changed my life, and even, I think growing up, we have struggles with our parents, or, the people who care for us. And it clicked for me that, I would think that my mom at times was just being, like, I don't want to say rough, but like not thinking. She'd come from a long day at work. She was tired. Those things didn't register with me. It was just kind of oh, mom's not in a good mood. I shouldn't be around her. Versus mom has her own stuff going on. And I need to be respectful and not jump on her the moment she comes through the door and ask her how her day was, because she needs time to decompress. That hadn't crossed my mind. So that actually made that relationship specifically, and many others, so much more peaceful. Was to say, hey, this person has other things going on. And just because they say certain things to me doesn't mean it's all about me. Shocking, right? The world doesn't revolve around me. As children, we're sponges, and we absorb and kind of figure out through the people around us how we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to act. And it's actually fairly recent for me recognizing, wait a minute, all of these things I've been living by are really ideas of other people. So it's kind of this exciting, who am I really? And I think it started with that whole therapy journey as well, of that those insights. And wait, I can make choices. I can choose not to feel this way. I can choose to better understand this situation, this person, this event, no matter what it is. Because kind of going back to, growing up with divorced parents, for the longest time, I blamed my father for so many things. I can't do this because of what happened with my dad. I can't go to this part of town because I have it associated with bad memories. And, I going through cycles of, I'll give him a chance. I'm big on, I don't want to have regrets. And even if it's a situation that can be good or bad, there's two sides of every coin. But I want to have the experience because I don't want to have, end of life deathbed wondering what if. That is like the biggest, I don't want to call it fear, but that is scary to me, having this thought of what if I had said this? What if I had, given an opportunity to someone that I held back? What if I had said hello to that stranger in the store? What if I had asked that person that I had a crush on, ask them on a date? These are things that I just don't want in my life. And having been so protected as a young person because of my health, I feel like I kind of got a big dose of that, which, I thought I would have a lot of regrets coming from that place of, I can't do so many things. I can't do this. I can't do that. But it really put into perspective how I get to live my life. I actually have been in contact with my dad recently, and he asked me to tell him all the things that he'd done that had hurt me. And I got really emotional, and I took a hot second and thought of all of the ways I could present that information. And the powerful thing, doing all of the work I had done, was recognizing that not only could what I brought up really be hurtful to him, and he's in a vulnerable place for himself, but it wouldn't be any good for me to drag myself through all of that. So that was something that was a big growth point for me. And I think, in long-term versus short-term thinking, short-term, I could have gotten it all off my chest. But in the long term, it I think was much more powerful to say we can't change what happened, and we can only move forward, and that's what I want to do. And he had and has his own struggles that have absolutely nothing to do with me.
Yeah, isn't that amazing when you can see that? There was a lot of learning, I heard. There's a lot of learning you've taken away from that. And I heard the tool that you used was therapy. Were there other tools that you used to be able to walk through that?
I think, well, the therapy that she used was actually called the Three Principles, founded by Sydney Banks, which is, the concept of mind, consciousness, and thought. So it's very based in how the mind processes things. But if I could touch on stress for a second, the most amazing thing looking back, I don't think you see it in the moment, but stress has been a core theme throughout my life, let's say. And even looking back, when I talked to my mom about how was it having kids, and she said, well, she had a hard time conceiving, and that was a very stressful time for her. So thinking on that, my brain kind of connected. If my mom was in a state of stress, I think that I don't want to say I know, but on some level, there's this kind of gut feeling that because of that stress, I was in an environment of stress of sorts. And when I recognized that, I was able to say, well, wait a minute, I've lived a life of stress, the stress of academics, trying to be the best, being an overachiever. And I noticed something kind of funny, that as I got out of school, as I got out of that environment, I was getting sick less. And it almost sounds too miraculous, but there were times where I would talk to the doctor of, hey, in a few years, like, let's say I get off this medication. And I am actually very happy to say that, I'm kind of got my hands on my face right now saying this, but after 20 years, I'm 29 years old. After 20 years, I'm off the medication.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm recognizing there were things about my body that I wasn't paying attention to, that as I'm paying attention to now, you know, I'm recognizing like I have a hard time holding heat. So I need to put socks on if my feet are cold, because I'll start to feel my immune system dropping. You know, I don't know if people would say that's not possible, but there's this feeling of I need to do something to get my body into a place where it's in an equilibrium. And that wasn't something I'd ever looked at because I was so busy on the other things. So not being reliant on so many medications. There was a time I was on more medications than my diabetic grandfather who was in congestive heart failure. And I went to the doctors recently and, you know, they listed off the, I think 3 or 4 medications that I'm on, most of which are over the counter. And they're like, that's it. That's it. So just looking at how much stress impacts the body, the mind, short-term and long-term, you know, even my brother's an amazing example of this. My mom had a good pregnancy with him. He's been healthy, but he had ADHD symptoms, right? So short term, he was put on a medication. He learned how to work with his symptoms, and now he's off the medication and knows how to work with it. So intervention is an amazing thing and can really help you get where you need to be. What's awesome though is taking that next step of learning how to work with your body, your environment, and making things work in such a way that interventions are used as the tools they're meant to be and not as a way of coping with life.
The other thing that you talked about too is important is that often we treat somebody for the mental issue and that's it.
Right. Like you can't build a house without a foundation. You know, I kind of like to liken it to that, because you can slap up walls, you know, but if you didn't put the nails in them, you know, you didn't make sure that it was stable, ultimately in the long term, short term, it looks fine. Long term, you're going to have a really rundown situation. It's the communication. Like it feels like on some level we're 2 parts, you know, we're our consciousness, but we have this physical form that we need to take care of. And that becomes apparent over time, because if you're not eating the right things, if you're not exercising and taking care of yourself, a lesson I've learned fairly recently, through, you know, making sure you're staying in motion, you know, and it can be something so simple as going for a walk or just doing stretches once a day. Do some form of movement. And I never would have been an advocate for that until very recently. But it makes a difference. It makes such a difference to engage all parts of your body, mind, and spirit, if you will, because it is all interconnected so deeply. I was going to say, it's totally crazy how things like can show up in one place and actually be indicative of something going on somewhere else. You know, so it's always paying attention. And if you don't pay attention, your body will make you pay attention at some point. It'll hit a point of, oh yeah, no, we're going to make you pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. If you had one piece of advice to give somebody that's listening today that may have dealt with some of the things that you've dealt with, sickness, stress, anxiety, needing to change a career, due to internal work, what would you tell them?
I think that the biggest thing is reach out, find people who have had that experience and have grown through it. Find a community, find someone you trust, whether it's a Facebook group, you know, whether it's talking to Kelly or me. It's so important, because the more we keep to ourselves, it can really become a very small world when you're not connected with a greater community. And I would encourage that. I think for the most part, just that sense of community, it helps with growth. It helps keep you sane at the end of the day, having people that, you can trust, you love, and have that return as well of being part of a community. Never keep things to yourself, especially if they're concerning to you. Or even if you're just starting to have interesting thoughts, talk them out with other people. Find a trusted friend, advisor, someone you can really trust, because when two minds come together, so much more can come out of it, so much insight, so much perspective. Like, I used to keep to myself really badly. And I have to say, through everything, connecting in the online space has given me so much more of a scope of understanding of things I never could have thought about myself, because I'm talking with people who are in different life situations, who see things from such an amazing place that for myself, I probably never would have seen. And that's like such a blessing in so many ways.
Absolutely. I love that advice. And to be able to keep yourself open to others and to share and to find that support you need. And you will find it as you look for it, because there are so many people, so many resources out there that are willing and wanting to help. So if somebody wanted to be able to contact you, how would they do that?
I'm on Facebook, so you can find me there. My name is Christa, spelled Christa, and my last name is Theg, Theg. And you can also email me if you'd like at Christa, Christa, dot Theg, Theg, 93 @gmail.com.
Wonderful. Thank you, Krista, for sharing your story with us today.
You too. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you, audience, for listening to Krista. And remember, there is a way through your difficulty. Please seek out resources and people who can and will help you. Now, if you're looking for alternative tools for handling difficult times or moving ahead in life, contact us at www.resiliency.coach. Hope you all have a blessed day and a wonderful life. Goodbye.